Hey, good evening, Galion. This is Mayor Tom O'Leary back at Facebook Live. I really enjoy doing this every 2 weeks, but tonight I'm actually excited about doing this because some of the changes that happen over the next couple of weeks, and candidly, for once, I don't mean it for once, but tomorrow night's a good night to watch the council agenda, and there are 2 or 3 new items on there that I think are very important in leading or setting a direction for the community. So I want to talk a little bit about some of those things tonight. Before I get into the tomorrow night's council agenda, I want to have a confessional moment, if you will, and that regards how the city, how Galion as a community needs to approach this lack of a grocery store option. Now, I've talked for a couple of years. In fact, before I came up here tonight, I was thinking it was about 2 years ago when I had a major health issue that we had what turned out to be a pivotal meeting about whether or not a new grocery store was going to be built back in 2017. So here we are. At that point, we had Geyers and we had Save-A-Lot and the options of Drug Mart and other places, the $2 Generals. That was kind of our set of choices. And at that point, I made a decision to allow the private sector to really do what they do best, and that's create opportunity and investment and those kinds of things. And about 90% of the time, you take that point of view, at least my philosophy, is that's the right course to take. Let the business sector work it out. And I got to tell you, folks, that this is maybe the 10% that falls into the community, the city, if you will, has got to do something. And so over the last week or 10 days, frankly, since the last time I fielded a question about are we getting a new grocery store, I've really changed directions, almost 180 degrees. Political opponents or people who want to jump on it would say, I'm about ready to flip-flop, It's not the case. I think we've been very patient at City Hall in trying to work through. Big supporter of what Drug Mart's done. Very optimistic that Save-A-Lot will make a major investment there. But I've always been in the camp that we need another grocery store. And so at this point, really shifted away. I'd love to be proved wrong on this, but after about 1.5 years of trying to get the old Geyers location replaced with a new operator, I've really decided that is increasingly unlikely to happen, and that the city needs to put their efforts and some of their financial resources to play in terms of getting a new grocery store operation built in the community. So I talked the last time I was here a couple weeks ago briefly about a port authority and how a port authority could be formed in a way to make a sports complex increase the odds, make it its likelihood optimized. And I think that same structure, that same entity of a port authority is the ideal entity to put into play a publicly supported financing of a commercial operation that could be not only grocery store, but perhaps could provide some additional services that were a little bit lacking in terms of social services or county services that support people in our community. And so I really began to work over the last week or so on developing a plan to do that. That being develop a grocery store shell. And so my desire is to introduce that, talk about it a little bit tonight, let the people who are each time we're on here who are asking about Are we going to get a grocery store? What are we doing about it? Just want to wrap up that part of our discussion tonight by saying, you know, sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes you place confidence in this case, the business sector to get this done. I got to believe, for a long time I thought it was more important to the landlord and potential grocery store operators to open up something here than it was to the community or to City Hall. And on that I was wrong. It's more important to us in this community, including myself, to make sure that a new grocery store is brought to town than it is to rely on out-of-town landlords and more likely than not an out-of-town operator that would see this as a great opportunity to come and make some money selling us groceries. But the bottom line is we've got to change course and change directions. And if that presents a challenge to the landlord to get a deal done, then, you know, maybe that's okay too. But we can't go on the way we are. And if Save-A-Lot moves to make a renovation, a modernization of their store, I'm sure City Hall and I hope City Council will step in behind that. But we've got to do something in the near term, and we've begun working on that in this office, and I'm pretty encouraged about what we can do with regard to that. I want to transition to one other thing, and then I can see that we have some questions. Last week, I believe it was Thursday, meaning the city, closed the deal on the old Commerce Center, and that the former Crane plant, HTI, Commerce Center, whatever label you want to have, is now replaced with a new label, and that's the Galion operation of Mosier Industrial. And so, without getting into a lot of detail, I think the income coming off that sale is perhaps ideally used to help make this grocery store operation in support of a port authority that would fund it a reality rather than a every other Monday night idea in the mayor's monologue. So big things happening, excited about being able to sell that property, and really as often happens when you change course on something important in your professional or family life, you know, you get excited by that. So we're moving off as the primary strategy, getting the existing building re-rented as a grocery store, and moving towards something that this new Galion deserves, which is a new modern grocery store operation. So, all right, what do we have for questions?
Okay, first jumping back to the topic of grocery store, Sheila asked, can we reach out to chain stores to ask them to come?
Well, I think what we'll do is at least a two-prong approach, probably more than that, but a two-prong approach in that we're going to pursue some of the major national, in some cases international retailers, grocery store operations. You know, the big companies, corporations like Walmart are always developing new products. And for instance, there's a Walmart product out there that's smaller in terms of square footage and focused more on a specific niche within the grocery industry. I think everybody recognizes really dynamic. I was talking to someone today, I'll digress for a second, who says not only does she lives in the greater Columbus area, not only does she call Kroger and make her order, but now she has an app where somebody goes and picks up her groceries and brings them home to her. So the idea of what we maybe grew up with or were used to 15, 20 years ago, and it's certainly changing rapidly. And so what I see happening is this multi-prong or two-prong approach where we pursue those major retailers and see if they are interested in operating in a community of our size that's not a county seat, because people who watch this a lot recall that we've talked about the question, why does Bucyrus or why does Mount Gilead have a Kroger or have a Walmart? And that has a lot to do with models that the commercial retailers use to decide where to make their investments. And if you're not a county seat and you don't have certain population demographics, you're really fighting an uphill battle. So one prong will be to approach those, pick your favorite chain store, major grocery store operator, and talk to them about something not in the 40, 50,000 square foot, or maybe not even in the 30,000 square foot. That's Walmart's smaller product, is in the 30, 35,000. It may be something more like Geyer's was in the 20,000 or slightly less than 20,000 square foot size. I'm learning as we go, but I really think that something like that would work here. So that's one approach, the national retailers. I don't have a preference, but I think my hunch is that we will find a partner more readily if we go with successful independent grocers. That's what is been marketed to in terms of the former Geyer's operation, and I really think that those independent grocers that have survived to this point in a very competitive market are very smart operators and know how to make grocery operations in smaller communities operate successfully. So I think you'll see what we're going to do is talk to the big retailers, and then we're going to continue to market some of those successful smaller community. When I was a kid, we called the IGA, Independent Grocers Association. So those kinds of things. I'm not suggesting Cornell's and Shelby is one of those targets. Might be, but an operation like Cornell's and Shelby that's been there a long time, operates as an IGA, might be the kind of target that we try to market to. And then finally, some of the larger independent grocers. I think I've mentioned by name that we in the county and development and city in our efforts to develop have contacted Buehler's as a for instance. So that's maybe a little bit bigger than some of the IGA operators, and it's certainly not the Buehler's certainly is not in the same category as Walmart, Meijer, or those mega retailers. So. Good question. I think it's a multi-prong approach, and my sense is we'll be successful. I don't want to predict what the name on the store will be at this point, but we're switching gears and going to a more active approach, and instead of presenting to potential operators a 40-year-old, 50-year-old store, maybe in need of repairs. We're going to present a brand new facility, and without getting into the financing details, because that will put people to sleep. Heck, it'll send them to the NBA playoffs. Watching some game they don't care about. But I'd say that I'm really convinced that we can construct a building and get it equipped, and then bring in an operator, and it'll be a real successful combination for the community and for all involved. So, all right, I over-answered the question, so let's see if we have another one.
Sure. Next up, Gene asked for an update regarding the street parking out on South Boston Street.
Yeah, I think that went through committee, and if we didn't get back to you, Gene, I'm sorry. It looks like the lane widths are sufficient to allow, the way the ordinance is now, that if you have the lane widths that you do out there, that if you have 11 foot, I believe is the number, but I'll stand corrected if somebody has, that it can't be prohibited. So when you have less than a travel lane for each direction, that's when we have limited it. An example of that would be Erie Street, where there's really only pavement for parking on one side of the street. So what I was told, what I saw when I went out there, is that out south of the former Wilma Crawl School, there's enough pavement to be able to park on either side and to have a lane of traffic going in each direction. So, but and just one more thing with Gene, there's probably another question. I wish he would come to the next, and we can contact you because you've been good enough to send this in. We'll send you a message back when the next Streets and Alleys Committee meeting is, and perhaps through coming there and explaining a little bit better from the terms of what it's like to live there, they might consider changing the ordinance, which gave us a little more authority to prohibit parking on one side of the street. So I mean, from Gene's point of view, that's a pretty crappy answer, but please come to the next council meeting. I don't want to blow you off because I'm real familiar where you're talking about, and it's an issue that persists, if you will, all the way south to where Market ties in and that Y intersection down there. So it's where it stands. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. Next question comes from Samantha. She asks, regarding the alleys in town, are there ways community members can make them safer, especially when it comes to walking through them at night? Any kind of additional signage, anything to generally make them safer?
Well, you know, I'll check. I don't want to argue with Samantha over the premise of her question, but I'll try to see what we have down there in PD in terms of reports. The walking in alleys, particularly saying from dusk to dawn, is probably not something that I'm not the safety advisor, but I probably wouldn't do that. There probably, however, are some alleys that people just commonly use that a street light might make a difference on. But I'll think about it. It's hard to imagine, but questions like that I don't have an answer for right away. They do have a way of getting inside my mind, and I'll think about it and maybe come up with a better answer. But I mean, I'm not sure. Alleys, I thought when Matt started reading the question, I thought the alley was going to be about people having access, and it may be just the spring of the year, but there have been more than we're used to over the last 5-6 years now of neighborhood disputes over where the alley is. We got neighbors going out and surveying, and really it does turn out that where the alley is, as a practical matter, sometimes isn't where the survey says, and so that presents a problem. But the safety of it and the walkability of it, I really hadn't thought much about it. But Samantha, I'll as I often say, noodle on it. And she can please follow up with some questions, or try to clarify what she's saying. But we have more problems with alleys not in the place they're supposed to be according to the property map. And what do you do with that situation? So we had a guy in here just today for about 25 or 30 minutes talking about some alleys that really weren't alleys, and this was in and around the South Street railroad track area. Talking about beer cans. Not to belittle it, but there's 2 or 3 places that serve alcohol, and there's probably going to be some beer cans in the parking lot.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. Next topic comes from Shauna. As the weather gets nicer, animals are coming out. What can the city do about the stray cats, raccoons, and skunks?
I think when we have specific locations, we'll do what we've done in the past. What I mean by locations, like a resident that's vacant and it's the Raccoon Hotel. What we've done when we've had those kind of complaints, and generally what happens on those is a pet, is the owner is worried about their pet's safety because of this 15 raccoons living next door. And so what we do in those situations is there's a critter guy out there, and we hire a critter guy, and he comes in and we trap them clean. That's a little bit like herding cats, though, because whenever you get rid of the first 15 raccoons, there'll be 12 or 13 more that will come back in. So it's kind of a never-ending process. Last couple of years, I've been concerned. Honestly, I haven't done a whole heck of a lot more than say to my wife, gee, honey, I saw a lot of skunks. It does seem like we've got more of a infestation. I don't think anybody will be offended about me saying if you have skunks, it's infestation. You never know these days. But if I offended any skunk lovers, I didn't mean to. But I've noticed a lot more skunks, and I think that becomes more of an issue where we may need to bring in wildlife control and come up with because you don't want a unscientific and not very successful approach to getting rid of the skunks. But I've noticed that cats, I don't know. We've talked about that, not maybe for a year like the question premise. Well, springtime's coming around. It really is an encampment, and I don't know honestly quite how to resolve that among the people that let the cats breed, let the cats live. I'm going to feed them. These feral cats, don't deserve to die of starvation, and what I would describe maybe as cat haters at the extreme, but people who don't see that sense of humanitarian, what's the right word? Humane sensitivity. So cats are brutal. I would I don't want to crawl out on a limb with some half-baked idea, but what we really need to do is coordinate with the Humane Society and the local veterinarians, because I know in the past they've sponsored things like spay and neuter holidays or whatever. So I think when it comes to all of these darn cats, that the ones that haven't been spayed or neutered, we ought to address them, and this greater issue of feral cats, maybe save that for step 2. But I would certainly, I guess I like the idea that prompted by the question, that cleaning up the varmints through our critter guys, coons and skunks, and then perhaps attacking the cats and the dogs running wild in a different way. Since the question was asked and you're watching or turning off, I'll go on to one of my pet peeves. I'm really about done with coyotes. I mean, they're really menacing. And I bet everybody watching and other people around the community have a story or two about the coyotes did that, or the coyotes did something else. And so in terms of this issue, you think of the little rodents, the coons and the skunks and the cats. Cats aren't rodents, but we're really, a big menace in these rural and small town areas are the packs of coyotes, raiding pets and other more friendlier animals. So I think when we start to address that, I think the best way is spaying and neutering with some sort of program effort of cats, and then being aware of what we need to do to address the coyotes. Heck, with Galion growing the way it's going to, the coyotes will be losing habitat. And there might be some people concerned about the survival of coyotes and those kinds of silly things. So, all right, I'll give it up. That's not that funny.
Okay. We're going to switch topics again. Going to park maintenance.
Yeah.
Lori says, many people are helping to clean up the parks on their own time. What is the city doing to help?
Gee, I don't know. I spend about $80,000 a year mowing and maintaining the parks. I mean, I don't know. I'm not so thin-skinned that I'll want to fight you, Lori. Is that was the name? But I'd like to debate you. I don't know what. I mean, if picking up the parks is one citizen taking care of one other citizen that their parents didn't teach him any manners, I mean, I think that's what you have to have as civil society. it's a darn shame that people who use our parks think that they're a place to throw cups and straws and cigarette butts and all that other crap. But I just want to thank Lori's one of the people that picks up the park. You know, I think that's pretty cool. I happen to be not as good about picking up my dog's dog dirt, but I also think that's real important civic thing that happens is people walk their dogs in the park and the dogs relieve themselves. So, you know, to summarize, we spend a lot of your money, most of your tax, your parks tax on your income tax goes to salary and benefits for the people who maintain the parks. And I think they do a pretty darn good job. You know, I think there was a time when the Galionites were punished by City Hall through the parks. Got to pay to turn on the lights. We're not going to have this open. We're not about that. And so we do our best in maintaining the parks. And if this questioner or others have particular parks that are in bad shape, then we'll then focus our attention on that. If what she's talking about is Kobe Park, that is a huge headache, and it represents probably a facility, an asset, if you will, that I wish we didn't have. But I spend a lot of time in the parks, and I just pick up the garbage when I see it. Heck, I'll even pick up a cup on the sidewalk. What a great Galionite I am. So I think a lot of it has to do with the people with good civic responsibility are going to have to pick up for the slobs. But like when's that changed? And we'll continue to spend $80,000 in salary and about 40% more of that in benefits to maintain the parks. And you know, they aren't perfect, but if you go back 5 or 6 years, man, it's hard to tell the difference.
Okay, next question tonight comes from Matt. He asks, has the city applied for any more government money to tear down the condemned houses?
What's going on with that is, I think I talked the last couple of these Facebook Lives about mobilizing $30,000 that was sitting dormantly in the city coffers, and we're getting ready to identify those projects and tear those down. The same, from a taxpayer's point of view, the same pool of funds that comes to the county that we use part of that pool to tear down the Neff's building. It appears like there's going to be some more money available for those properties here in Galion. So those two sources are really about the only one's 30 grand, and I wouldn't expect more than 30 to 50,000 of the other block grant funds to be reallocated to Galion projects. We produced a list of, oh gosh, I want to say at least 24 addresses that we believe would be qualifiers for that reallocation of county money. So, you know, not as much as we'd like, but we're still keeping focused on that and have a whole sheet full of targets.
Okay, thank you. Next question comes from Lori. She asks about the old Eagle Crusher land. Is that going to be cleaned up?
You know, I'm going to answer this in an indirect way. One of my favorite things about new technology is if you have access to the internet, and Lori must because she can ask us good questions, you can go online and look at various properties and see who the property owner is. That property and a handful of others that if you were picking, say, the top 10 neglected former industrial facilities in Galion, they'd all have the same owner. And so that's been a problem. Very, very significant and very wealthy individual is a bit of a collector of buildings and a maintainer of none. So, like, they might say, well, gee, Mr. O'Leary, if we do that, we'll find some of your properties aren't well maintained. Well, you know, everybody does the best they can, but some people who have a large asset base, maybe they're not doing, I think most people, but not everyone does. So that property owner, who will remain nameless, but look it up yourself, owns a lot of stuff like that. And I would say the odds of getting much meaningful enforcement are limited, and about what I think would be almost a certainty is that you would meet this guy's lawyer face to face if we began to take serious enforcement action. So it's kind of a, I don't know if I'm allowed to say pansy anymore, but it's kind of a pansy answer to it. But take a look, see who the property owner is, and then call us back either, or send us a message in a couple of weeks and we can talk a little bit more about it. The list of properties this individual has, you'd have to pick which one's worse. So it's kind of a mess back there, that's for sure. Or, yeah, back there, if you will, at Murray and Hardingware.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, can I do one more thing on that? I guess it's my time, and if people are still watching. There has been more money available for the demolition of residential properties than commercial properties. So when you raise a question about industrial or commercial properties, man, the money to get those torn down is real limited to assist in that kind of process. And so then you're stuck with simply enforcement. And then the city is engaged in a bunch of battles with people that that they'd have to lose the battle before they demoed it. So I don't know. I just wanted to add that where we've made progress on dilapidated properties, it's been a lot more on the residential side. And I'd be the first one to acknowledge that there is quite an unacceptably long list of commercial properties that need a wrecking ball. Hey, but I would say the old subway building is going down. So all is not lost, and some responsible property owners are doing the right thing. So maybe we can shame these other guys and gals into doing what they ought to be doing.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Next question comes from Heath. He asks, has the city taken a position on murals for uptown buildings? Can property owners contract with artists to create murals?
Well, I think in the uptown area, you're going to get into some design review stuff. And so I would proceed with caution. From my perspective, when I've been approached as a representative of the city on city-owned properties, I think it's important to coordinate and work with artists that are better, that will do what they say they're going to do. And so we've had, for a couple of years, we've had interest in it. So I've been a little underwhelmed with the tangible response from the artistic community. So I'd advise two things. One, make sure that it meets any design review standards, because the question is right. There's some nice properties that would be improved if you could put a mural on the side of them. But it's also important, the second part is to find artists that are going to produce stuff that's generally understood as artistic and not, I don't know, I don't want to make half the group mad, but like glorified graffiti, we should approach that cautiously. So urban street art in Uptown Galion, I kind of like what they've got in Bucyrus, and when it comes to murals, something along those lines that hits my aesthetic or artistic taste a little bit better than freeform modern art in Uptown Galion. So there you go. Tom the art critic.
Okay, thank you. Next question tonight comes from Terry. He asks, when is cleanup day for the garbage and trash?
Gosh, I don't know. I think without copying out a little bit, our service director spent most of today working on trying to accommodate a kind of a high number of utility turnoffs. So be honest with you, we haven't set a date I'll ask Matt a question, the voice that you don't see. We haven't set a date yet, have we?
No date set yet. However, the health department is receiving a grant to fund collection for tires and mattresses. So we want to make sure we coordinate with them based on their grant restrictions, and have one day where we can do the trash, the tires, and the mattresses.
I think so. To give you a little bit better gauge, I think sometime in mid-May. There generally is a little bit of room between the Mother's Day weekend, and that's everybody's idea of celebrating Mother's Day, clean out Grandma's garage and take it up to the dumpsters, and graduation, where there's just so much activity going on that it's hard to get a lot of people focused on that. They're either going to parties or doing one thing or another, organizing their own celebration. So if I had to venture, and I will venture a guess, somewhere between Mother's Day weekend and Memorial Day is when we'll shoot for, and hope that works. That's, as we've talked before, it's a cleanup day for those responsible citizens who clean up and bring their stuff up here. But for our staff, the same ones that we should be picking up in the parks, they spend about 4 to 6 weeks kind of going around afterwards, finishing up cleanup day. It's kind of turns into cleanup month up here. So we're going to try to, again, with the health department's help, that gives us a little bit of ability to narrow the target when we will accept things like mattresses and, what did you say, old tires, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah. So there's so many mattresses and old tires that show up in Galion, Ohio. It's almost like there's a magnet turned on when we have that. But 20 mattresses here or there. I think they're importing them. But anyways, we're going to do it. To be serious, we're going to do it. It's probably in that third week in May. And my least favorite, but most appreciated service among citizens. Just a headache for us up here, but we'll complain about it, and we'll be up there volunteering. So whenever that weekend's set, I'll see you up there.
Okay, thank you. Next question comes from Hillary. Has the city considered community gardens for vegetables in the empty school lots to support surrounding neighborhoods?
Yes. The efforts haven't been real productive so far. And recently there was a farmer from, I think it's just in Morrow County, that was interested in doing something along those lines at the Dawsett property, the old Dawsett school property. 2 or 3 years ago, we were in support of a project that was going to go on the south side of Heist Park, just east of the water plant. And some people remember we brought some piles of topsoil in, and it just never got past that. So I see that type of initiative better initiated by church or other civic groups, but supported by the city. So, folks may, people certainly can disagree with that, say the city should do more, but if a city role is identified to make community gardens happen, we'll do it. But you have to have the right chemistry. I've read about and studied on community gardens, and you have to have a decent water source. Somebody's got to pay for it, or it's got to be unbilled. And you really have to have the owners of the parcels within the community garden be responsible for maintaining them. And that becomes, can become an issue if you don't set it up right properly. So that's probably enough on that. We're there if somebody wants to come up with an idea. And recently there was one idea of doing that on Dawsett was proposed, and it's it's really in the very, very early stages of coming into reality or crapping out.
Okay, we're going to jump back to home demolition real quick. RC asked what properties are getting torn down this year.
They're listed I'll tell you what, where we are is the decision to tear down one commercial property, which would consume most of the money, or 4 or 5 residents. So we're trying to make that decision before we move on that. I also don't think we've got technical final approval from the state to do that, but I could be operating on last week's information. So so the answer is no, we haven't identified the targets. One of the things about the money that we're going to be using to do this is that the property owner retains the ownership of the land. And so I think you have to pick your targets properly, and you want to make sure that you're not somehow rewarding somebody that over-invested in real estate, and now they want the state to come in, or the federal funds to come in through the city, tear down their property, and then they've got a cleared, seeded lot. So no, we haven't identified it. 4 or 5 residents. I'm kind of inclined to pick one of 3 or 4 significant commercial properties and get rid of them. But that's where we're at this point. It's a decision. It's not a council decision. It's a decision that'll be made now that the weather's turning and it's time to identify those targets. It'll be made within the mayor's office. It's really an administrative decision if you accept that. Accept's not the right word. That is how it is. So we'll make a decision, but it's not been made yet. Sorry for the ramble.
Okay, next question comes from Tommy. He asked, can you give a projected timeline for the 598 widening project?
Yeah, the sale date for that. Oh, I'm all excited about it. I didn't even mention that. It's on council. Come tomorrow night. But that is scheduled to sell in July 1st of 2021. So it seems like a long way off, but it'll hit us before we know. And my guess is that we'll get, with weather cooperating in an early contract sale, we might get the thing done in 21. That wouldn't be the end of the world, but it wouldn't be optimal is if the actual finishing up of the project, the last few feet, striping, some of those items that are really seeding, those kinds of things may happen in the spring of 22. But the plan is to sell it early in calendar year 2021 and build it from there. I suspect, hang in there, keep watching or listening, and about July at the latest we'll probably know the time frame and how the construction will work. And I love to talk about that topic and be happy to share with you what our thinking is and how long we think the project will go. But yeah, it's kind of exciting. I talked to somebody today, a merchant, who said, you know, we got to get that thing laid out there. It's just too chaotic, and I had to agree with him, and so it's July of 2021. But in 2019, I've talked about it a lot. I'm glad it's going to come into reality. But tomorrow night, I really hope that council approves an ordinance that authorizes the service director to bid the traffic signal at Brant Road and 598. So we got an estimate. If we don't physically have the set of plans that bidders will be able to estimate and bid off of, we'll have that tomorrow, and really excited to get that project advertised, let, under contract, and constructed. And you know, time we'll see when the light goes up, but it will be in 19, hopefully not into the colder months of 19. So that's a really good thing. It will help out there at Brant and 598. Won't solve all the problems, but I'm excited. I know a lot of people who utilize that intersection, particularly from the north end of town, kind of coming up on Brant Road and worried about entering onto 598. Though they can't. My guess is they can't wait for it to get done. So make sure your councilman votes for getting that passed on emergency tomorrow night, and we can get that thing into the contractor's hands sooner than later. It's really good for Galion. Glad to be part of it. Anything else?
Nope, you're good.
Wow, I've talked him out. Uncle. So, anyways, thanks a lot, folks. There continues to be a lot going on. My prediction is that we'll make tangible results relatively quickly on moving towards building a new grocery. If nothing else, we'll get some private sector people motivated to get this deal done. But we can't sit around and wait for the landlord and the last operator of the store and the new operators to work through all these things. You know, maybe most of us listening to this tonight or watching this tonight, they've got a car. And they just drive over to Mansfield and grumble about it. And there's an awful lot of people in this town, meaning thousands, who just can't get around that well. The age of the community, you know, the lack of transportation for more people than those of us with cars realize makes this, you know, something that we can't just wait around and hope something happens. We've got to take charge of this, and so we're gonna move aggressively at making a grocery store happen. And I apologize to a certain extent for being wrong over the past year and putting too much confidence in things getting worked out. So we're going to get moving on that. I think that's positive for Galion. And if you don't have anything going on tomorrow night, come on up to City Council. I think there are 8 or 9 pieces of legislation that you would have to be totally disinterested in Galion and therefore not watch this, not to find it important. So if you can't be there, you know, try to get a report back on what happens tomorrow night, because there are a number of things that are on the agenda, and we need to get a playground built, and we need to get some other pieces of legislation approved in an expedited way. So we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. If not, have confidence that we're going to operate and conduct ourselves in a way that gets Galion this momentum we've established, keep it going in a greater way. So thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.